Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be putting Single Strike Lugia in the spotlight for the Japan 2023 World Championships in Yokohama. Let's get straight into it with the general strategy of Lugia. And that is that Summoning Star is the entire build around of the deck. We don't really do much until we flip that V-Star marker and attempt to get, ideally, 2 Archeops into play. So our little mini quest of Lugia is to get some Lugia V developed, as well as discarding a couple of our Archeops via our Ball Search cards via the supporter Professor Burnett, or simply using Professor's Research and Serena to get rid of these Archeops so they're nice and in the discard pile, ready to summon onto the board once we find Lugia V-Star. As soon as we get our Archeops developed, we are accessing the best energy acceleration available in the game, where one Archeops can tutor 2 special energy from the deck and attach them to one of our Pokemon. So if you got 2 Archeops out, we can be burst accelerating 4 energy every single turn, which means we can play some pretty silly attackers. The ones we're looking towards are Single Strike Pokemon, because then we can use the Single Strike energy, which provides an additional 20 damage, as well as being a dark and fighting energy, which means we can represent 2 great type coverages in the format. The Evoltol being a really good up-trading attacker into Mew VMAX as well as Gardevoir EX. Tyranitar being the general high damage output of the deck with that Single Strike Crush dealing 240 base, but we can push that damage output even further with those Single Strike energies, which do stack. And of course, we have then fighting type coverage via the Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, and that Gmax One Blow is a wall breaker. It allows you to go through the effects of Duraludon. Even though we are a full special energy based deck, we can still hit through Duraludon thanks to the Single Strike Urshifu VMAX. So at least we have a chance and don't immediately concede to that matchup. Onto the skeleton list then. Lugia continues to be a real consistent performer, and there's not too much to the deck really. The item cards are all the Ball Search, just trying to help you get your combo on turn 2. Like I keep mentioning, that's when the deck starts essentially. You can also see that reflected in the stadiums. You'll see Mesagoza as an option in the deck, giving us a coin flip for a Pokemon. That's really how desperate we've become with Lugia, just to get that turn 2 play off. But because we are able to Tempest Dive away stadium cards, there are situations where we can get that coin flip and then remove the option for our opponent at the very least, which is something going for us. As mentioned, we have the high damage output attackers from the Single Strike Mons in fairly low counts, but do get the job done overall. And the supporter cards, again, trying to facilitate that Archeops, where we have the Researchers and the Burnett in here. And then we are having some Iono and Boss as well in the mix. And it's really down to the special energy, which are the selling points of the archetype. The Single Strike energy helping our damage output really go over the top. Double Turbo is very efficient and helps us retreat around our board as well. Gift Energy is our own protection around Iono, so that when our attackers are getting knocked out, we can increase our hand size once again, which is always fantastic. Jet Energy, again, giving us some easy pivoting. We have 3 retreat cost Pokemon all over the board, so being able to jet around these is fantastic. From the hand, of course, not from the Archeops in this instance. And then V-Guard Energy helps us push out of range of a few key attackers and making sure that we're more difficult to knock out for Mew players, for Giratina players as well, certainly Arctina, that sort of thing. And in the mirror match, these V-Guards are also going to be pretty important. Onto the matchup spread for Single Strike Lugia then. You are very favourable into the NAIC winning deck list, which I do think is appealing. The Rapid Strike Urshifu deck, although it may not be hugely popular at Worlds, it will certainly be jumping in popularity from the NAIC, because there will be a number of players who have noted its success and have taken it upon themselves to start playing the Urshifu archetype. I do think it will be probably around that 5% as a minimum now, I think, going into day 1 of the World Championships. So definitely something nice to sort of claim, doing well from the previous NAIC winner. Let's not forget that last year, the NAIC winning deck was essentially the same deck that won the World Championships in 2022 with a couple of different tech cards. So it could be the same again, where Urshifu, we know it can go deep in tournaments, so why not run it back in the same metagame? You also seem to be pretty solid into the Charizard builds of Lost Zone Box, as well as Miraidon. Surprisingly, you're really pretty favourable into that. And oftentimes that's down to the tech attackers that we can have in the deck. Certainly if you play Stonejourner, you're going to have a really nice uptrade option from a single prize attacking mon, although that wasn't in the skeleton. Even just Urshifu, its size as a VMAX Pokemon means it can claim multiple prizes on its own, which is excellent for you. Additional favourables, pretty nice into the Chien-Pao Baxcalibur deck, pretty okay into Lost Zone box as well, which is a good thing to have on your side, and also reasonable into Ting Lu. For even matchups, the Arctina, oftentimes this is decided by early path shenanigans and how it can stick against you for the Arc players. Also, they can sometimes play Spiritomb, which can slow you down. Mew is also a fairly even matchup. You have the uptrade potential with your Dark-type attackers, but it's how they can once again try and disrupt you, either with early knockout pressure on their side of things, or if they have, again, Path at their disposal, that can sometimes slow you down. Gardevoir seems to be an even matchup, as does the Lost Zone Giratina deck, and surprisingly, the Wings of Union deck is also an even matchup. You'd think that a one-prize archetype that has lightning type coverage would be better into this one, but it just seems to be even from the statistics. Your only unfavorables then become the Arcdura Umbreon and Goodra Lost Zone, which, you know, Goodra's certainly not all that popular at all, and Arcdura Umbreon, although isn't a popular archetype, you know, it's not the worst unfavorable to be taking. So I think this has one of the most appealing matchup spreads that I've seen so far in these Spotlight videos. You're favorable into Lost Zone and you're okay into Gardevoir. That already ticks a number of boxes, but then the wider field you also seem to be generally pretty strong against. So there is maybe a bit of an undercurrent of people disrespecting Lugia right now in the format for how much play rate it's seeing in online tournaments. Let's have a look at some tech options then. And first of all, we have the other supporter cards that can sort of round out the deck. I certainly like Serena as an option. It gives you an extra gust potential, but also gives you this means of having some discard, but you then get to hold other pieces in the hand. That's one of the issues of research. You've got to dump the lot, but there are certain situations where you need the discard for specifically some Archeops, for example, on turn 2, but you want to keep other pieces in your hand, like some of your special energies or urns or that sort of thing. Serena can really chip in at that stage and be a clutch card, even as a 1 copy, that also just in general adds to your boss's orders out for the majority of matchups at the very least. Zinnia's Resolve could do a similar thing in at least the discarding aspect, so that's something to bear in mind. And Thornton as well allows you to chip in and double dip on some of your key attackers based on the matchup. This can be really nice with your Urshifu, this can be really nice with your Yveltal as well. This has some real power spike potential. And alongside Collapse Stadium, it's another way that you can try and offset a prize map from players, making your Luminion far less of a threat, or I guess far less of a downside as you get to the later stages of the game. So these are all supporters worth considering. Then we have the sort of helpful abilities that we could be chucking into the deck. Radiant Serena definitely making life difficult for the Lost Zone players, where they don't have the easy Greninja plus Sableye sprinkles on your Archeops. They also allow you to push your T-Tar out of range of a Cram plus Sableye combo. So I think that's also really important. Squawkabilly, a great card that you could try and use in the opening stages just to see some more cards and adds additional discard synergy to the deck. And Pumpkaboo giving you some bull searchable means of removing Path to the Peak, so you're not slowed down from your summoning star. This is one that I always like to see in my Lugias personally. And then we have some single prizes you could also try adding into the deck list. The Stonejourner definitely has some upsides with that fighting type coverage. If you are expecting more Arc decks, this is going to be a real nice carry for you. Impact Energy doesn't necessarily have to go alongside the Stonejourner. This in general can just be helpful for your Yveltal, or just adding to a 5th copy of a Single Strike Energy means that you're less urn reliant throughout the game and less scuppered by prize cards as well, so it definitely is a consideration. And Snorlax is more of a sort of catch-all card, again, helping out against the Lost Zone players, helping out against Gardevoir players by just being a pretty annoying, chunky single-prize Pokemon that can slot into the deck and take advantage of a lot of these colourless energy that are already in the deck list. So let's start with a no-thrills build of Lugia then, and I'm someone who personally thinks the no-thrills build is, in this case, actually the best thing you can actually do in Lugia, because it's so inherently focused on getting that turn 2 combo off that any card that you add into this deck that sort of takes away from the consistency just hurts your percentages across the board. So at this stage, if there's anything you want to cut for some cheeky cards, just know that you're hurting your overall percentages into every matchup. I think the only other thing I'd consider is if you're not expecting much path, maybe Pumpkaboo can become 2nd Collapsed or 3rd Mesagoza. That would be the only thing that I think is like not a consistency cut, but just sort of diverting away from worrying about path too much, just to have another sort of power spike card in the stadium cards. So this is a real cookie cutter build, and just hoping that the ability of Summoning Star and the attackers at your disposal are strong enough to be a real top contender in the deck, and just let the deck sort of do its thing. One other thing I did want to show off was, like I said, if you're not too worried about path and don't want that pump Kaboo option, we can try and cut away from the Radiant Serena and have an additional single prizer from the Snorlax instead, with that Thumping Snore option, and jumping to a third Jet Energy and an additional Collapse Stadium, so that we again have those decent ratios on our side for making life difficult for our opponents and removing these multi-prize threats that we have to use in the opening stages, whether or not we need to get double Lugia established because our opponents are threatening knockouts, or if we have to Minion for crucial supporters to get into the game. You can then collapse these away later and just have a board with Yveltal, Snorlax and some Archeops around, or even just your V-Star Lugia as your only 2-prize mod at that stage in the game. So these are really nice, crucial cards, and I do think Snorlax has a place. I think it's a really annoying attacker for God of War players to deal with. I think it's really annoying for Lost Zone players as well. That's why you see the Serena cut from this list as well, because you already have the unfazed fact to fall back on, where the opponent can't easily two-shot this and are forced to use multi-prizes into you, which can again really improve your prize trade overall. Let's get to the closing thoughts then, and there wasn't too much to say about the deck list themselves. Lugia is a well-established archetype, well-ironed 60, you know what you get with Lugia, and it's really just down to how you pilot it in the opening stages and how good your opening hands are. That's the good and the bad of Lugia. You can see on here the closing thoughts are that you need to have the right temperament to play this archetype, because sometimes there's things that are just out of your hands. This definitely feels like Lugia just kind of does what it does or doesn't, and there's not much that the pilot themselves can do on the first couple turns. You're really just playing with what you got, and if it's going to get you towards that Summoning Star, you're going to have a good game. If it doesn't get you there by turn 2, you're going to have a bad game, and that's really something that you need to accept when you play the archetype, but also know that we've made a list to make it as streamlined as possible and as consistent as possible to try and get that job done. The only other things I really want to mention is that Spiritomb is a tech that kind of catches you in the crossfire, so if you're expecting a lot of Tomb because of Mew and its power and its potential at the World Championships, maybe it's not a good placement to play Lugia for exactly this tournament, because you do get hurt and you do lose a lot of percentages if your opponent is getting early Tomb developed against you, sometimes in addition to Path of the Peak, that can really slow you down. That can certainly happen in some Arctina builds. So that's the only sort of metagame shift for Lugia. If you're worried about Tomb, this is probably a time to not play Lugia. So I do think there's likely to be a decent amount of Spiritomb at the World Championships, because it certainly helps a few matchups, not just Mew. As I've just mentioned, it hurts the Lugia players as well at times, and can also hurt Chen Pao, I think, as well, a decent amount. For the final bit of good news, it's an archetype that certainly wins quickly or loses quickly, so you are going to be able to conclude your best of threes with Lugia quite happily, because when you're rolling, you're going to be knocking out anything in your path, and when you're not, you're going to know when to scoop quite quickly and move on to the next one. It's very black and white, it's very obvious with Lugia where you're at in the game, and if you're able to mount those comebacks or not. Even though you are an archetype with Iono and Iono proofing, it's pretty obvious just doing an attack turn clock, knowing where you're at in the game and how likely it is for you to make that comeback. So should be very easy to conclude all of your best of threes, and that's something that is really appealing for the World Championships. Let me know your thoughts on Lugia down below. Was the matchup spread more appealing than you expected? And is it an archetype that you're considering for the World Championships? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.